drew their lines, they chose their sides, built their towers, called them right. But something waited beyond their view. These two every hand reached for the wheel.
The Holy City and the Restored Kingdom. We now return to the statement that opened one of the most important questions in this investigation. The Zohar describes earlier kingdoms that could not endure. Then it gives a reason: the adornments of the king had not yet been prepared, and the holy city and its walls had not yet been prepared. Only afterward does the text describe an order that remains associated with male and female. Source: Zohar, Idrazuta, Zohar 3:292a. This is significant because the Zohar does not present the city as an incidental detail. The preparation of the holy city belongs within the transition from the earlier unstable kingdoms to the enduring royal order. So we must ask, what does Scripture show concerning the restoration of the city before the final everlasting order? The Tanakh gives us a very clear pattern. Isaiah speaks repeatedly of Zion being rebuilt, restored, inhabited, glorified, and governed. Isaiah 60 describes nations coming to her light and kings to the brightness of her rising. Her gates remain open. Foreigners rebuild her walls. Kings minister to her. The nation and kingdom that will not serve her perish, and the glory of the nations comes into her. This is already a restored royal Zion, exercising authority among the nations. Yet this is not necessarily the final condition described at the end of all things. Zechariah gives another remarkable picture. Jerusalem is inhabited again. The nations are still present. Many nations join themselves to Adonai, and Adonai says that he will dwell in the midst of Zion. Source: Zechariah 2. The city therefore becomes the place of his dwelling and a center from which divine government extends outward. Ezekiel gives us the same restoration pattern from another direction. The desolate land becomes like the Garden of Eden. The ruined cities are rebuilt and inhabited. The nations remain around them and witness what Adonai has done. Source: Ezekiel 36:33-36. This is crucial. Eden has been restored in the land. Cities have been rebuilt. The people have multiplied. The nations remain. History has not yet disappeared. This is restoration. It is not yet the final removal of every enemy. Isaiah 65 confirms the distinction. There are houses to build, vineyards to plant, children and descendants continue. Human life is greatly extended, but death has not yet disappeared entirely. Therefore, the new heavens and new earth language of Isaiah 65 cannot simply be collapsed into the final condition described in Revelation 21. Jewish tradition itself preserves this distinction. Midrash Tehillim applies Isaiah 65:20 to the days of Messiah and describes human longevity returning to an earlier condition. The person dying at 100 is regarded as young. That interpretation is extremely important to our investigation. The messianic restoration contains extraordinary longevity. But longevity is not immortality. Death still exists. This agrees with the larger scriptural pattern. The Zoharic statement concerning the holy city now becomes much more important. The Zohar places the preparation of the holy city within the movement from the former unstable kingdoms toward an enduring royal order. The city, therefore, does not appear as mere scenery surrounding the kingdom. Its preparation belongs to the establishment of that order. This returns us to the question with which Part 1 ended. Could Malkuth function not only as the queen's kingdom, but also as the protective royal enclosure within which the king dwells and reigns? The evidence now gives us reason to continue testing that possibility. Malkuth is repeatedly associated with the kingdom. She is associated with the female. She is associated with the throne. She is associated with the crown. and Jerusalem is repeatedly presented in Scripture as the place within which the king dwells. The city and the woman, therefore, cannot be casually separated when the witnesses themselves repeatedly bring these images together. But we must preserve another distinction. The restored holy city of the Messianic kingdom is not yet the final New Jerusalem of Revelation 21. During restoration, there are still nations being governed. There are still generations being born. There is still cultivation of the earth. There is still longevity rather than universal immortality. And one final enemy still remains: death. That brings us to the next investigation. Let's talk about the last enemy: Satan, death, and the completion of restoration. If the Messianic age restores Edenic conditions, why does Scripture still require another victory afterward? Because restoration is not yet completion. The Tanakh had already announced that death itself would eventually be removed. Isaiah 25 says that Adonai will swallow up death forever and wipe away tears from all faces. The promise is not simply that human life will become longer. Death itself must disappear. Isaiah 65 describes extraordinary restoration and longevity. Isaiah 25 goes farther. Death is swallowed up. These are not identical conditions. An ancient Jewish witness gives us another remarkable piece of the pattern. Jubilees 23 describes an age in which human life begins increasing toward 1,000 years. People live in peace and joy. Healing fills their days. And the text says there will be no Satan and no evil destroyer among them. Source, Jubilees 23. This presents a restored age in which Satan's destructive activity no longer operates among the people in the former manner. But first Enoch introduces an additional pattern. The rebellious heavenly powers are bound and confined until the appointed day of final judgment. Then comes their ultimate punishment. Source, 1 Enoch 10. The pattern is therefore not merely judgment, it is restraint first, final judgment afterward. That distinction becomes extremely important when we finally bring in the New Covenant witness. Revelation 20 follows the same sequence. Satan is bound. The nations are prevented from being deceived in the former manner. The 1,000-year reign takes place. Then, after the 1,000 years are completed, Satan is released for a short period. A final rebellion occurs, and only then is Satan removed permanently. Source, Revelation 21 through 10. The 1,000 years therefore cannot be the final everlasting condition. An enemy still exists during that age, even though he has been restrained, and after Satan's final removal, another enemy still remains to be dealt with: death. Revelation 20:14 says that death and Sheol are finally cast into the lake of fire. The sequence is precise: the 1,000 years, the release of Satan, the final rebellion, Satan's final judgment, the judgment of the dead. Then death itself is removed. This agrees with 1 Corinthians 15. There we are told that the Messiah must reign until every enemy has been placed beneath his feet, and the last enemy to be abolished is death. Source, 1 Corinthians 15:24 through 28. Notice what this establishes. The reign has a purpose. The kingdom is actively bringing enemies into subjection. It is not merely a period of peaceful waiting before eternity. The reign continues until every opposing power has been dealt with, and death stands last. Now we can return to the question concerning Malkuth. Does the evidence establish that the daughter has an appointed role in this final victory? We must be precise. The witnesses establish that Malkuth is kingdom. They establish her royal authority. They associate her with the stone. They associate her with sovereignty. They associate her with the female joined to the male. And Tikkunei Zohar speaks of her as the stone hewn without hands and connects her with the crown of sovereignty. Elsewhere, Tikkunei Zohar describes her as the daughter and says that when elevated, she becomes a crown upon his head. And still another passage calls her the most precious stone and describes her as a crown above the others. Sources: Tikkun Zohar 20a, 25a, and 61a through 61b. This is extraordinary evidence for Malkuth's elevation and royal completion, but it does not explicitly say that Malkuth personally destroys death. Scripture assigns the destruction of the last enemy to the completed reign of the Messiah under the authority of God. Therefore, we should not make the text say more than it says. What we can establish is this: Malkuth belongs to the royal order through which the nations are brought into submission. She belongs to the restored kingdom. She belongs to the royal union. She is elevated as the precious stone. She is associated with sovereignty and crownship. And she belongs to the royal order through which the work of restoration moves toward its completion. Whether she performs a particular final act against death cannot yet be proven from the witnesses we have examined. Her participation in the royal order is clear. A separate individual act of destroying death is not. The same caution must be applied to the question of another crown. Tikkun Zohar clearly gives us more than one form of crown imagery. Malkuth can be below, she can ascend. When elevated, she is described as a crown. She is also called the most precious stone and a crown above the others. Therefore, the possibility of a final elevation associated with completed restoration is consistent with the pattern. But we have not found a witness that explicitly says, at the end of the 1,000 years, the daughter is assigned the personal act of defeating death. We cannot claim that as established. What we can say is that the texts preserve a remarkable pattern of progressive elevation. The stone rises, the female is established, the daughter is crowned, kingdom is restored, the nations come beneath royal government, and the final enemy is eventually removed. Whether the last stage of that process includes another distinct coronation remains an open question. But the removal of death itself does not remain an open question. Scripture is unequivocal. Death must finally cease, and when it does, the restored kingdom gives way to something greater. Now, we are going to take a look from restored Malkuth to the everlasting kingdom. We can now see why Scripture gives us two stages. The first is restoration. The second is consummation. During the restored kingdom, the earth again bears the marks of Edenic restoration. The land is healed. Cities are rebuilt. Zion rises. The nations are governed. The king dwells in her midst, life is greatly extended, and the royal order of male and female stands where disorder once prevailed. Yet this is still not the final condition. Satan can still be released. A final rebellion can still occur. Judgment still remains. And death itself has not yet been abolished. Restoration has brought creation back into order. Completion removes the final enemy so that the former disorder cannot return. This distinction helps explain the movement from Isaiah 65 to Revelation 21. Isaiah 65 contains restored earthly life. Revelation 21 contains the condition after death has already been removed. Revelation 21 does not begin with Satan being bound. That has already happened. It does not begin with Satan being judged. That has already happened. It does not begin with death being defeated. That has already happened. Only after these things does Yochanan see the new heaven and the new earth and the holy city, New Jerusalem, descending from heaven. Source, Revelation 20 through 21. And now the characteristics change. Death is no more. Mourning is no more, crying is no more, pain is no more. The former things have passed away. The city does not merely belong to the restored earthly landscape. The city descends from heaven, and she is identified as the bride, the wife of the Lamb. This is not simply restored Jerusalem continuing under improved earthly conditions. This is the everlasting order after the final enemy has been abolished. Daniel had already seen a kingdom of this kind, a kingdom that would never be destroyed, a dominion that would not pass away, a kingdom eventually given to the holy ones of the Most High. Source, Daniel 2 and Daniel 7. The stone of Daniel 2 strikes the kingdoms. The stone becomes a great mountain, and the kingdom fills the earth. Tikkun Zohar later identifies Malkuth with the stone hewn without hands and connects her with the crown of sovereignty. The correspondence is striking. But the full scriptural sequence shows us something even greater. The stone is not merely restored to her position. The kingdom represented through this imagery ultimately participates in an order that does not pass away. This is why we must not combine the millennium and New Jerusalem into one stage. The millennium is the stage in which the restored order associated with Malkuth is established. Revelation 21 reveals the everlasting order after the work of restoration has reached its completion. During the first stage, Edenic conditions are restored within creation. During the final stage, death itself is gone. During the first stage, Satan is restrained. At the end, Satan is permanently removed. During the first, nations are being ruled and healed. In the final order, everything unclean is excluded from the holy city. During the first stage, the kingdom continues toward the subjection of every enemy. After the last stage, enemy has been abolished. The everlasting order stands. Restoration prepares creation for permanence. And that brings us back to the Zohar's unusual language. The former kingdoms could not endure. The arrangement was incomplete. The holy city and her walls had not been prepared. The enduring male and female order had not yet been established. But when the proper arrangement appears, the text describes an order that stands. What began as a mysterious statement concerning a city, a female, a male, and an enduring kingdom now aligns with a much larger scriptural architecture. There is a kingdom that must be restored first. There is a city that must be prepared. There is a royal order that must stand. There are enemies that must be subdued, and only after the last enemy is gone does the kingdom enter the everlasting condition from which death and the former order have been removed. We began this investigation with one stone, but the witnesses kept opening the picture. The stone was connected with Malkuth. Malkuth was connected with the daughter. The daughter was connected with the kingdom. The nations appeared beneath the authority of the restored royal order. The desolate earth became like Eden. The precious stone was elevated. The female was crowned. The king and queen stood in an enduring face-to-face order. Then the holy city appeared, not as an insignificant background to the kingdom, but as part of the preparation belonging to the establishment of that order. Yet even this was not the end. Satan had to be restrained. His final rebellion had to be judged. The dead had to rise. And death itself, the last enemy, had to be abolished. Only then does Scripture unveil the final city, New Jerusalem, the bride, the wife, the everlasting dwelling of God with his people. The investigation therefore reveals not one moment, but a progression. Malkuth restored, Malkuth elevated, the kingdom established, the nations governed, Eden restored, the royal union standing, the restored holy city prepared, the final enemies removed, death abolished, and then the everlasting city revealed. The millennium is restoration, but restoration is not the end. Beyond restored Malkuth stands the everlasting kingdom, and there at last the final enemy is gone.
Oh, no more left, no more right, no more kingdoms fighting for the light. What was divided, what was undone, these the two back come one. What no one could do will be done. What no one could do will be done. These two